The Airbnb bust is real. Now, if you believe some of the doomsday predictions and statistics flooding the internet, Airbnb revenue is dropping off a cliff, and these owners won't be able to pay their monthly bills and are likely to dump their properties onto the housing market by the thousands, bringing on a housing market correction and a likely crash in prices of 30 to 50%. Well, some of these Airbnb bust headlines might actually be true in certain pockets of the United States and maybe other places in the world as well. Let's take a look. Now, in case you don't know, I am Douglas Lucky Larson on the Retire Early and Often channel, where we talk about real estate and the economy and some very unique ways for you to retire early and often. Now, let's take a look at some of these headlines. These kinds of headlines are very common out there on YouTube and also in the greater media world. We've got home prices will decline. We've got coming surge in inventory to drop home prices by up to 35% in these areas. We've got 50% crash. Wow. Phase 2 of the housing crash, collapse and foreclosures explode. And then down here at the bottom, sell now. It will be worse than 2008 painful housing market crash. Okay, if that's not enough, let's look at a couple more. Yep, Airbnb owners are about to sell. Massive housing crash ahead. 50% crash. This is Gurley is his name. Anyway, he's always got headlines like this. Airbnbs will not perform well in a recessionary environment. 30% off in Tennessee. Yeah, anyway. Now, let's be real. There are some areas around Orlando and Austin, the Smoky Mountains, Phoenix, Las Vegas, parts of Utah and Idaho, and the coastal Carolinas where the short-term rental market is pretty saturated. Revenue is definitely dropping, and there are other factors as well. Things like skyrocketing insurance and taxes going up, as well as condo maintenance fees going way, way up. And at the same time, some cities and specific communities with their CC&Rs and HOA rules, they are cracking down on the short-term rental market. New York City has a new local law 18, and in many parts of California, many communities in Florida, they are passing and enforcing new legislation to shut down Airbnb nightly type rentals. Several years ago, on the island of Maui, new laws were passed to greatly limit the number of short-term rentals. I lived there for 5 years, and I have many friends who had to shut down their small bed and breakfast businesses. Now, it usually wasn't an entire house. It was a little, cottage in the back, or a little, part of their home, a couple rooms or something like that. They had little apartments. They did not sell their properties, but simply took them off the short-term market and began to lease them out long-term. That was actually a little bit of a boost to the local rental inventory. That's kind of what was hoped for by the county of Maui. And now many cities and counties in the U.S. With a shortage of rentals seem to think that cracking down on Airbnbs will help. It might. Even though I don't think it's nearly as big a problem as these fear mongers broadcast, I can tell you that it's real on an individual and localized basis. Here's my personal story. So, just this last summer, I bought a house in Daytona Beach, Florida, just 2 blocks from the beach, from a seller who got fined over $5,000 for having an unlicensed short-term rental. His only reason for owning this cute little blue house was to have a place near the beach to visit and to generate some extra income when he wasn't using it. Well, the city cracked down. Code enforcement came around, and I guess they gave him a first notice, and then the second notice was, oops, here's a fine. He then took it off the short-term rental market and rented it out long-term. But that defeated the whole purpose for him to own the property. So he sold the home to me at a big discount from retail. It was probably worth about $300,000 if it was cosmetically perfect on the open market. I found it through a wholesaler who got it to me for $212K with a quick closing, and with the agreement that I would honor the rest of the lease. There was about 6 more months left on the long-term lease. And I also needed to be able to close very quickly because the seller really needed his equity back out of the property. He had some other thing that he needed to get to. So I stopped by and talked to the renter, and I offered him $1,500 if he would be willing to move out within a week or so after my closing date. He was happy to do so for some cash, and it was worth it for me. And he made $1,500. He also left me some decent furniture and a TV, so it was a win-win all around. If you are creative, there are always good deals to be found. Don't listen to the fear-porn pessimists who keep screaming that a crash is coming, so just wait and don't buy anything right now. Well, you might just end up waiting and never buying anything ever. I've seen that all too often. Now, these doom and gloom fearmongers, they don't know your situation. They certainly don't know mine, and they certainly don't know what your future holds, or any future. Now, if this anecdotal experience of me buying this Airbnb property from a very motivated seller is repeated dozens of times or hundreds of times in a specific area, well, I could definitely see localized price drops of maybe 10 or 15% in home values, even if it's not a total crash like we saw in 07, 08, and 09. Still, even if the Airbnb bust is real for a few people here and there, I just don't see an avalanche of ultra-motivated sellers that are going to crash the total U.S. housing market. If there are a few discounted properties in the Airbnb saturated areas or where there has been a municipality crackdown, well, it might help buyers find a deal. Maybe you. And it might help some long-term renters find some better pricing. Again, I don't see a crash, but maybe a little pricing relief in some areas. I do know of several short-term rental owners who are having some distress. There are some rental arbitrage people I know who are hurting right now. If you haven't heard of rental arbitrage, it's where a hopeful Airbnb business owner approaches a landlord, doesn't buy the house, but he approaches a landlord and offers to pay them a premium monthly rent. Instead of $2,000 a month, maybe $2,300 or $2,500 for a long-term rent. And then they furnish the property, all with the landlord knowing what's going on. They furnish the property with couches and rugs and beds and dressers and dishes and coffee makers and pots and pans, and then they rent it out in the short-term nightly rental like Airbnb or VRBO sites. This works out really well, so long as people are booking their vacations and money is flowing in. But if things slow down just a little bit, then they may have some problems. There are places that are a little bit oversaturated, and vacationers aren't spending quite as much money as they were just a couple years ago with all the revenge spending after COVID and all that. So in places like Orlando or St. Petersburg or LA or Virginia Beach or Phoenix or downtown Chicago or a dozen other places, short-term rental hosts are getting squeezed. I belong to several short-term rental groups on social media, and I hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. That's all happening right now. Short-term owners and co-hosts and arbitrage hosts can often be seen trying to sell their short-term businesses as a whole entity, or even selling them off, like, maybe just the furniture, and then going to a long-term rental model. Read this little ad right here. I have 3 Airbnb houses that are 5-bedroom houses, and someone can either buy all my furniture or someone can take over my lease for the house with the furniture and then run the business. That's rental arbitrage, and it sounds like if it was an awesome business, they'd be keeping it, but they're interested in selling either the furniture or the whole thing as a business. How about some other examples? Hello, I need to sell all my furniture from my Airbnb property. Everything must go. Looking for someone to take everything. Got shut down by HOA and need everything gone. Ouch. All right. How about this one over here? Selling 2 Airbnb studios on Collins Avenue in Miami Beach, Florida. DM me for more information. Fully furnished. Yeah, this kind of thing is real. Now, some people, quoting statistics from AirDNA or All the Rooms, seem to think that we've already fallen off a cliff, but it's just not showing up yet with the distressed properties. Well, I can tell you, it's not. It would take a lot of distressed sellers to truly crash the market. And trust me, you will know when that happens. Now, when people ask me what I think is going to happen, I like to say be very careful if you're trying to become an Airbnb host to make sure that you've got good demand and friendly local laws. To potential home buyers or investors like myself, I say just hunt for a property like an African lion hunts for dinner. As a lion on the African savannah, you can't eat an entire herd of zebras, and you don't need all of them to suddenly break their legs all at once. It's actually best if the zebra herd stays healthy as a whole, but there's always one or two little weak ones at the edges. There's always some lame or old or young, tasty little zebra that's just pretty easy to pick off because it can't keep up with the herd. And that's how you find your next meal. Now, I don't want calls from PETA or animal activists here. This is just how things work in the real world. It's not pretty, but weak animals don't survive. In business, weak ideas don't get funded, or at least they shouldn't. If they do, we work, people lose money. And hopefully they learn by the lessons that they get the hard way. With cryptocurrencies, well, meme coins with no real use case eventually get flushed out. Now, I don't mean to harp on this tangent, but it's the same in real estate. With that former Airbnb Florida beach home that I purchased, the seller did make money on the sale. He was selling because he was just frustrated that he couldn't do short-term rental and have a fun place to visit. I believe I did mention his $5,000 fine by the city. Now, this property had become a pain point for him, and he wanted it gone fast. We call these kinds of sellers motivated sellers, and there are always a few property deals around the edges that look like tasty little zebras if you're a lion on the hunt. A true market crash would need at least 10% of the whole zebra herd all to suddenly become lame all at the same time. Suddenly, you'd have 5 hungry lions, but 24 gimpy zebras all laying down like easy meals. The lions wouldn't even have to work, and pretty soon the zebras would just lay there and rot until the buzzards came and ate them. Now, we are just not likely to see that in the broader national real estate marketplace. Now, let's talk about some things that we can probably expect in 2024. First of all, the Airbnb bust will most likely be localized and specific, but it's not going to affect the broader markets. The same fear porn Airbnb Bust promoters will also tell you that there's a silver tsunami of baby boomers who are about to flood the market as they all retire at the same time and race to sell their homes all at the same time. Now, we're just not seeing an indication that that's about to happen. Doom and gloomers will also tell you that hundreds of thousands of homes are about to go into default and that the market will be flooded with foreclosures any minute now. It's just not true. There are some rising defaults, but foreclosure is months and months and months away, and we're not seeing it even close to the rates that we had in 2008, 9, and 10. It's not even a fifth of what was happening back then. So again, not likely to increase any kind of inventory anytime soon. Now, that kind of stuff may happen in the market eventually if we see economic problems, stock market crash, job losses, significant job losses. We are seeing some, and a totally deflating economy. But I've been hearing from people like Peter Schiff and Harry Dent. They've been screaming about this kind of stuff for 12 years now, ever since we started coming out of the last housing crash. And an economic crisis may be on its way, but it's just not happening yet. And I'm sure glad that I didn't listen to those guys over the last decade. Well, at least I didn't follow their advice. Those guys tend to make money promoting fear, selling you books and products that are supposed to offset or thrive in a bad economic environment. But in reality, uh, real estate and the stock market and the economy is good about 70% of the time. It's growing and things are doing well. So, you can listen to the doom and gloomers, or you can, assume that America is a great place and that people will find a way. I love the great quote: the easiest way to make $1 million is to borrow $1 million and let someone else pay it off. And that's pretty much what my whole thesis has been and my investing career. Now, again, the Airbnb bust is real, but it's much smaller and more localized than the perpetual pessimists would have you believe. The economy, the stock market, and the housing market will continue to be very specific to local markets and will include all the usual inputs like jobs and interest rates and inventory versus demand. Now, in some areas, let's say Texas and Florida, there may be a little bit too much building in some specific spots. And guess what? You're going to see weakening in prices. But other areas like coastal California, which I know very well, will always be limited by, number one, the ocean, and the other is red tape. There's always going to be more demand than supply, and guess what happens? Prices go up. All right. Right now in early 2024, as interest rates are coming down, or at least stabilizing in the mid sixes for the moment, and new inventory is just hitting the market, it might be the very best time to buy that house. Only you will know what's best for you. But if you plan to be in the same place for 5 years or more and own the home, owning that home can give you like a better financial footing somehow. Well, don't let anybody else scare you out of it. Now, the next slide. Here's some questions that I think are really important for you to ask. And again, I am not your financial advisor. Let me give you some examples of people that I personally know where home ownership was the right thing for them this year, just in the last 12 months. And another quick caveat, okay? Something a lot of people talk about, including the doom and gloomers, is that black swan events or geopolitical turmoil is real. And of course they are, but they've always been there. They've always been a possibility. And does the Middle East blow up, or does the Suez Canal completely shut down? We don't know. Does Russia Ukraine become even bigger, especially for Europe? Will China make an imminent move on Taiwan? I don't know. Will North Korea get their hands on actual nukes and put those on their missiles they keep firing all around? And will they completely destabilize Asia? I don't know. If these things happen, kind of like the uncertainty during the pandemic, it's usually best to at least have everything nailed down in your future that you possibly can. We can't do everything, but there are some things you can do. And those kinds of things, like even buying a house, can help insulate you from government whims or a landlord or just having one income stream. It's your future, and you have to decide what's best for you. So with that in mind, many people are still finding great opportunities for home buying, not just for investment, or like a long-term rental, like I like to buy, or for fix and flip, but for their own personal use. Now, I've got a brother that just bought a personal residence in Ormond Beach, Florida. He got a $50,000 discount because it needed some updates and it wasn't marketed well. The home is exactly where he needs to be for work and his kids' schools. It's about 5 miles from the beach. It's even got a newer roof, good insurance, and a swimming pool. The home is about $500 more per month than he would be paying to rent that same kind of home. But he wanted the security of home ownership and not being at the whims of a landlord. Not to mention, he's building equity, and he hopes to refinance in the next year to bring down his monthly payment. I know a young couple that just had a second child in November. They were living with her mom, and they were saving up some money. Well, with the second child and diapers and crying and all that kind of stuff, they started feeling a little cramped in December. And so, at the very end of December 2023, it was just the right time for them to move into their own space. So, when they did the math on a 3-bed home versus a 3-bed apartment rental, they found that it was really only going to be about $100 more, but they would have to move out into the suburbs a little bit further. But it worked for them. They bought the house and moved. I have a good friend who is not married. He bought a 3-bed, 3-bath townhome, brand new, a few months ago from a builder who paid down his interest rate for a few years, and my friend is renting out 2 of the bedrooms to 2 other roommates who are paying about 2/3 of his monthly mortgage. Of course, he had to qualify with his income for the whole house payment, but he doesn't have to make that payment alone. He can get help from roommates. A recent announcement from FHA says that first-time homebuyers will soon be able to use extra income from a mother-in-law apartment or an ADU accessory dwelling unit to qualify for the mortgage in the first place. Now, that is good news, and it provides one more option for creative people who want to buy a home. Now, that really is the lesson here. If you are willing to ask yourself the right questions like these over here, how can this make sense for me and for my needs and for my future? Instead of just listening to the pessimists, you will always find opportunity. As you've probably heard, pessimists always find excuses and optimists always find a way. I remember several years ago when I bought my second house on Maui. That's right, the very expensive, beautiful island of Maui. It really stretched my finances until I was able to rent out the main part of the house while I lived in the mother-in-law 1-bedroom apartment. Now, when talking with coworkers, they all thought I was crazy for paying that much for a house and crazy for even wanting to. I bought a total of 5 houses on Maui while I lived there in the early 2000s, and each one was a great moneymaker. My friends would roll their eyes at me and made fun of me a few times when I was neck deep in dust and renovations and couldn't always go surf or hang out. I did do plenty of that, but I couldn't always go. But just 5 years later, I had made over $300,000 on those properties while my friends and coworkers were still just getting by, paying rent and living paycheck to paycheck. Only you will know what's best for you. Don't put your life and dreams on hold because of the doom and gloomers. Instead, make gloominade. Now, as always, please remember that relationships are actually your most important life asset. And as always, thanks for watching. And please like and subscribe and share our content and check out one of these other videos right down here and over here. Thanks again. Hope to see you again soon.